So my name is Heidi Williams and I'm the editor of remotework360.com, and I want to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar, which is part of CONFEX's Roadmap to Live, a 20-week programme of webinars focusing on getting us back on site, which is certainly where we all want to be. This is the second edition in the series, and today we're focusing on working from home, doing it better the second time round. I'm really excited to have been invited to participate in the session because it's a brilliant blending together of the two things I'm currently passionate about. I've always been an event professional. I've been in the industry for 20 years, first in venues and then in organising roles at Tarsus and Reed Exhibitions. So, and then for the last decade, we've been running our own events at Smooth Event Management and helping clients in the last few months to get their events online virtually. So, but it's been challenging the last few months. And so like many of you, I've been diversifying. So more recently, I've been working with the Chief Executive Group, which is a US-based media platform, to develop and launch Remote Work 360. Remote Work 360 is an educational resource for businesses and managers to educate them on the tools, technologies, change management processes to transition to remote. So I've been lucky enough to talk to lots of people about transitioning to remote. And what's interesting is that many of them haven't transitioned. They're not in the office, but they've literally just moved everything they're doing into email communications and Zoom meetings. And that's both inside the events industry and outside of it. I've spoken to lots of people who are completely Zoom fatigued because they literally spend all day in virtual meetings. And when you speak to fully remote businesses, you get a real sense of just how differently they operate. So it's no wonder that employees used to being based in the office are struggling, because the way that you did things then isn't really the best approach for remote. And hopefully we'll touch on some of that today and get some ideas from some of our panelists about how we can do this effectively the second time round. So panelists, over to you. Kelly, if we could start with you, ladies first. If you could perhaps introduce yourself and tell us a bit about how you're currently working.
Yeah, so I'm Kelly Reynolds. I, same as you, Heidi, been in the exhibition and event world for 20 years. I'm from the UK, so I started my career in the UK and was there until last summer when we moved as a family to Abu Dhabi in the UAE, and I now work as the head of event operations for Capital Events, which is part of the AdNet group. So the situation we're in right now is when lockdown came in back in March, we began our working from home experience, and actually that lasted through until about August, when we started to go back to work in sort of small groups. So every other week a group of us goes back into the office. So we have team A and team B. But there's also like a team C, which are the people that can't come back for various health related reasons mostly. So some of the team are still working from home permanently. So we've kind of got this foot in both camps now, really, where some of us are back, but only half of the time, and some of them are not back at all. So it's been a challenge for sure, but I'm looking forward to talking about it more. Great,
thank you. And Ardy, if we could go to you next, to our second event professional.
Great, R.D. Whitney, from Portsmouth, New Hampshire today. Been 30 years in the event-related space, so been building professional communities. And a lot of times that involved working at event companies, because the gravity of an event can create a really nice professional community. So I spent about 6 years at Tarsus and 2 stints, and also at Diversified Communications. And at Diversified, was responsible group VP over a group called BCOM, Business Communities, where we specifically looked at taking events and building communities around them. So obviously been in lots of office environments like everybody on the call today. When COVID hit and New Hampshire went under lockdown, we all went remote immediately. And it's been a pretty interesting and pleasant experience, actually. I had just finished reading the book Remote, which is written by the author of Basecamp, the creator of Basecamp, which was written something like 4 or 5 years ago. It talked about the benefits of remote. So it's really interesting to see how the innovations happen now that we've been in lockdown. But looking forward to the conversation today.
Great, thank you. And Brennan, you're our resident remote work expert. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Absolutely. We're based Toronto, Canada, and as a business, we're fully remote, not going back to the office, don't have an office anymore. But I think what I can kind of bring to the conversation, or some of the additional insights I can add, is we have a platform which is called Soapbox, which helps managers, and I would say in particular, either new managers or remote managers, with their managerial work. Effectively, it's a workspace for some of these meetings, right? These recurring internal one-on-one with your direct reports or team meetings, whether it's leadership team or a small group team, to do some of the stuff that probably you feel like is missing, from the in-office ways of managing. And our goal really is to help you get out of the Zoom fatigue that I think a lot of us are in. And in general, just like a smoother, more efficient, more purposeful management style. We have a free app to do that. And obviously you can upgrade to the pro variety for all of that. But lots of businesses from, companies you probably wouldn't expect, restaurants, to Netflix, to, the Ubers of the world, the Lyfts of the world, the Facebooks of the world, using Soapbox to help them through this transition of becoming a manager, or help them through this transition of managing remotely. So happy to add, as much as I can to that conversation, but and share what I'm seeing from customers as well.
Great, thank you. And what about your actual remote work environment? I think you're 100% remote as a company, is that right?
100% remote. Yeah, most of us are local to the city, although that's starting to change as people move around and as we hire folks from out of country. So, but yeah, 100% remote. If we wanted to meet up, we would have to go to a park or something, right? There's no office to kind of find everybody at all.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So before we dig into the questions, actually, I wonder, I think the audience are likely to be interested, RD, and particularly in the UK events industry at the moment has been hung out to dry. There are no live events currently. And I wonder if you can just quickly tell us what's happening in the States, and whether there are any live events and how that's going.
Yeah, so the United States is 50 countries in a lot of ways, everybody with their sort of own decisions. So everybody shut down for a period of time. And there was just such a substantial thing at the beginning of COVID in New England here, where the Biogen conference was a super spreader event in Massachusetts. So things shut down pretty hard, but then states started to open, and they're doing it state by state. In fact, I'm going to my first live event on Monday, to the Biz Bash Connect event, which was going to be first, I think, in New Orleans and then Las Vegas, and now they're doing it in Orlando. And they're trying to do it as an example of how an event can open. So I'm excited to go. Of course, there's a virtual component to it, and I suspect a lot of people will be coming in hybrid, virtual, but it is a glimmer of hope.
Okay, great, thank you. And Kelly, in the UAE, what's happening there? Are live events happening with you?
Well, in Abu Dhabi at the moment, we're still waiting for an official restart date, but we're having lots of positive conversations. We're doing lots of background work. My area in the exhibitions industry is operations, so obviously we have been doing a great deal of thinking over the last few months about what changes we need to make to keep things safe, because obviously safety now has to be the #1 priority. So it's been good to have time to consider the new things we need to take care of ourselves, and also how we support our exhibitors and also the visitors that come along to our events. So it's been good to have some time to sort of take a breath and think about all those things. And we've been working closely with the authorities on all of those new measures as well. So we're hopeful that things will get moving again soon.
Great, thank you. Okay, so before we dig into the questions, actually my first question is about the challenges that you have encountered in working from home, and now that we've been at this a while, what steps you're taking or what changes you've made to make things run more smoothly. But I wonder if it would be good to find out where our audience are at. Dan, I wonder if you can launch that first poll. So we'd just like to find out, first of all, what percentage of you are still working from home versus mostly at home but occasionally on site, versus kind of a sort of 50-50 week on, week off type of arrangement. If you could maybe just fill in that survey to just kind of give us a sense of how you're working. Oh, it won't let us vote, guys. I just tried, didn't let me. And does it show us the results, Dan? There we go. Okay, so 70% of people are at home completely. About a quarter are occasional on-site duties, and only 2%, in fact, one person basically is splitting their time equally. Okay, that's interesting. And Dan, if we could also just see the second poll. So this one, we're about to ask the panelists what the challenges they're encountering are, but actually wanted to find out what yours were too. And you can actually choose 3 of these, and that should give us a kind of sense of what the kind of top issues are for everybody. Okay. I wonder if, there we go. And Dan, are you able to show the results of that one? Okay, that's really interesting. So maintaining work-life balance is the top problem, with over half of the respondents choosing that one. Managing productivity is also coming up pretty high, and staying productive. Culture is an issue that continues to be an issue, I think, for lots of people. Okay, so it's good to just get a sense of what everyone else's challenges are. But if we could start, Kelly, if we could start with you, what have been your challenges, do you think, in remote working, and what have you been doing to address those challenges?
I think the biggest challenge initially was just really coming from basically a venue where, you know, obviously everybody is at work permanently full time, because, you know, it's the nature of the kind of business that it is, to then all be straight off purely 100% from home. It was the not knowing how long that was going to last for. I think that was the first biggest challenge, certainly for me as a manager, at least. Because, you know, I can remember in the first week or two just sort of thinking, I wonder what everyone's up to. And you make a few phone calls and you sort of think, what shall I get everyone to do? Because of course we were all, you know, maybe not that early on, but we all quite quickly became keenly aware that perhaps this was going to last for a while, and maybe we wouldn't be working on those shows that we hoped were going to happen at some time during 2020. So that was the hardest thing to begin with. But I think quite quickly for me, I realised there's never nothing to do, even when something like this happens. So there was a lot of project work that I'd had in mind for us to work on over the summer. So we quite quickly, and I can't really remember when, probably week 2, maybe week 3, we started to have video calls like this. And having had my own business for 3 or 4 years before moving to the UAE, I was quite used to Zoom meetings and things like that, because I was working from home a lot and talking to clients on whatever medium they like, Google Hangouts, Zoom, whatever it was. But most people who'd never worked from home before had never even heard of Zoom. So it was quite a culture shock for most of the team. But we did quite quickly get used to it. And actually, we then started meeting very frequently online like this, and we just started working on these projects together. And so I think that really helped us overcome some of the challenges of, you know, the missing of the sense of community that you get at work. And let's face it, we're all in the events world, and so community is at the heart of everything that we do. And so we probably maybe felt that more keenly than some other industries did, the loss of having that on a day-to-day basis and the connection that we have with each other. So certainly for my immediate team, we were able, I think, and I hope they would agree with me, that we regained some of that. And I even think possibly we've become closer. I certainly feel like I've become closer with a lot of them, because we had those sometimes daily check-ins, and we worked really closely together, and we were still able to make progress and have a purpose despite what was going on.
Yeah, no, I think there has been a real coming together in all this, but I agree. I think in events it's been a double whammy. Not only have we not been able to get on site, but in what's a very sociable industry, we've not been able to come together at all. So no, absolutely. RD, could we put the same question to you?
Yeah, I think a lot of the trends in America were already heading in the direction of flexible work arrangements. You know, we need to do something about the carbon footprint. We need to do something about people's work-life balance. And that was addressing both of those. And I think people, you know, with bandwidth and other things improving so well, and the great SaaS products too that are pretty much cloud-based. You know, people were heading in that direction, and finding the advantages of that, but you know, also working to some of the disadvantages. But then when COVID hit, the really interesting thing is it forced us to innovate. It forced us to find ways to do what we were doing before and virtualize them. You know, my wife is a financial director for Habitat for Humanity of Greater Portland, Maine, and she was on her virtual board meeting presenting the numbers. And I said, do you think when we go back, you know, when you can go back into the office, do you think the board meeting will go back to live? And she's like, I don't know. It's a 50-mile drive. Like this is actually working out pretty well. So I think that's what's just been so stunning, is to say, well, that's how we did the job before. Could we do it this way? And I think we're finding in some cases that it's actually a lot better. It's a lot more efficient. I've literally never been so productive in my life. You know, you got to find the stop and start, but I've never been able to have, you know, 9 or 10 really good, thorough meetings in a day. You know, and so it's unleashing a lot of productivity, which I think will eventually come out in the numbers.
Okay, and Brendan, I don't know. I'm sorry, I've forgotten whether you were always fully remote or whether you went fully remote as a result of COVID.
We went through a transition, lucky on our part, before. And so we were fully in office as we kind of built the company, started the company. And we always had this concept that we called Work from Home Wednesday or Wired in Wednesday. And the idea was, hey, like, you know, no meetings on that day, work from home or work in the office, whatever you want to do, but like it's your wired in time. No one's going to distract you and all that stuff. The team loved it. Most of them worked from home. They were super productive. And, you know, the numbers showed like, hey, that day is like, you know, we'd get a whole week's worth of work done in that day. Do we want to do 2 of those days? Right. And so, you know, we talked it over with the team. Team basically said, yeah, please. So we added 2, and then, you know, eventually we added 3, and we changed the rules a little bit so that like, okay, like this, you might be working from home, but it doesn't mean there's no meetings. Like we still have to have our processes in place. And then 4, and then 5, and then COVID hit. And it's like, wow, well, we're, you know, just so happened to be finished our transition here. And I think like probably a rare example of companies transitioning prior to COVID. And, but I think going through, you know, went through a lot of the similar challenges, you know, the lot here probably going through. We just did it, you know, slowly, piece by piece, instead of, you know, all at once and probably in the course of like, you know, a week. So you know, I think lots of lessons learned. I think lots of pros and cons on both sides. And certainly for us, was definitely a pro to do all of that work prior to, you know, our cards kind of being forced upon us.
Okay, thank you. I think actually if we can tag this next question into that big issue that everybody was having of finding work-life balance. What are your rules? Do you have rules for working from home? And if not, should we? What does your documentation look like? What are what are the kind of non-flexible and flexible things that are at play with your remote working kind of approach? Kelly, if we could come back to you on that one first.
Yeah, I don't suppose we've particularly put a great deal of structure around it. I think one of the things for me that I found quite early on was that if I was sending an email to the team or to anybody really, not just my people that report to me, but anybody, you know, my boss included, I began to feel like you were just talking to nobody quite early on, because, you know, you're sending an email, and if you don't get a response to that email, all sorts of wild thoughts start going around in your head. Whereas if you're in the office, you just pop next door and say, did you see my email? You know, it's kind of urgent or whatever, or just wanting to know that they've seen it. So it's difficult to influence how everybody reacts to your emails, but I did ask within our immediate team that we that we at least acknowledge each other's emails, so that we weren't just, you know, not sure if somebody had seen them. But I think another part of your question that you posed to us was about cameras on or cameras off, which has been an interesting debate. And I'm sure some companies probably do have hard and fast rules about that, but we don't, which is quite nice in a way, because I mean, I do tend to be camera on, but you know, actually sometimes I'm just on calls all day, so you need to eat your lunch at some point. So it's quite nice to have the flexibility to turn it off. But I don't have a great deal more to add to that, because I don't think we've really put a lot of structure in. I think the expectation is still that obviously that people will, and it kind of goes without saying really, that people will still put in the effort and do the hours. But I think so many of us have had kids at home. We've been doing homeschooling, and you know, whatever other, you know, your partner's maybe at home working from home as well, and the whole juggling act of life and work, and it's all become one big sort of meshed experience, hasn't it? So I think we, you know, we were respectful of that as well, and that people weren't maybe having the easiest time of it at home. And so if they didn't get back to you within the working day, but it was later in the evening, then I think that's just how things have been. So it was we were quite relaxed about those kinds of things.
Okay, thank you. RD, how about you? Have you implemented rules? Have you changed any of the processes and how you do things with remote working?
So we're 100% virtual, and we're born that way. You know, for our culture, it really comes down to trust. You know, if I always say, like, if an employer doesn't trust their employee, why did they hire him in the first place, right? And some employees are morning people, some are afternoon people, some are evening people, and it's fairly easy for me to say this because we're in a business that can do this. If we were manufacturing something, if we were making sausages, you know, you all got to be there to make the sausages, but we're in a business where it can be project based, and it's determined on goals. So, you know, why not take advantage of that? Because you can hire the best people that want the flexible arrangements that fit around their work-life balance. But then that does put the burden on both the employer and the employee, that some rules have to be set. Like, you know, I think my team knows that if I send an email at 4 a.m. just because I've had a cup of coffee and I'm up and running, like, nobody's expected to respond back. And if I get one from somebody at 11 at night, I'm not a night person, and you're not going to hear from me. And you know, I think so. Those rules need to be in place across the culture. But it really, you know, ultimately comes down to, do I trust this person? And, you know, do I have good goals set, and are they achieving the goals? Because that measures itself.
I think that's really interesting. And that point about trust in particular, there was a study that Google did, it's something that Aristotle study or something, you might be familiar with it. And they found that the kind of the habits of the most effective teams, one of the kind of recurring themes was what they called psychological safety, which was the idea that teams, that your manager has got your back. You know, the idea that you can make a decision, and that you work closely enough together that you know that you made that decision based on the information to hand, and that, you know, to the best of your ability. And on that basis, your manager's got your back. And I think with remote working, where you don't have that, you know, across the desk opportunity to just kind of validate every decision that you're making, the importance of having trust, having each other's backs is really crucial. Brennan, can we put the same question to you?
Yeah, we are, we're pretty process driven here at Soapbox. And so I don't know if that necessarily means we have more rules. I think maybe we have more like norms and cadences that, you know, the whole company kind of slots into, and we kind of hit our groove together. But, you know, to directly answer your question, I mean, we don't have, you know, hard start, hard stop times. In general, I would say, you know, 9 to 6 or like 9 to 5. You know, we kind of expect reasonable response rates if you're going to communicate with people, right? But we don't do internal email. Very, very rarely do we send any internal email. It's almost all done through Slack. Basically, Slack is our, you know, the closest thing you could kind of get to like you know, the open office chatter or the water cooler noises that you hear. For everything from, you know, anytime a customer upgrades, it gets piped into Slack automatically, and we can kind of cheer together, to openly we talk about product roadmap. There, just publicly, anyone on the team can join in. So I think there's a lot of benefits in that way. You know, if we were in office, that conversation would happen in a room, and people would feel excluded. Whereas now those conversations happen in a way that anyone can kind of peek in when they have the time. And Some people peek in after work. Some people peek in during work and join in on those things. We don't have any fixed rules on cameras on, cameras off. I would say in general, our culture is just more cameras on. We see faces, quick calls, quick things. I mean, you know, whatever the default settings are usually get applied. But then when it comes to the process, we do have more kind of fixed rhythms of the business. So we operate on what we call 2-week sprints, and kind of an agile concept, but basically we kick off a sprint. Everyone decides what they're going to work on in the next 2-week period of time. And within that, we're rigid. We try not to change tasks too often. At the end of a sprint, we have a demo day where we all, you know, get up, I guess, but we go on a call and we demo to each other what we ship to customers, whether that's marketing changes or product changes. That's, in a way, that process is non-negotiable, right? You got to be there for it, but also it's fun. You want to be there for it. It's kind of the fun experience of the week. And we're very serious about one-on-ones. We're very serious about our team meetings. Those two reoccurring process meetings is where we batch most of our important conversations. And then urgent things can happen in Slack or, you know, whatever text conversation. So I do weekly one-on-ones with my direct reports. Camera on, we use Soapbox for it. We have set agendas. If anything can wait till the next one-on-one, it just gets added to the agenda. We track next steps there. We hold each other accountable. They hold me accountable. And we, you know, as RD was saying, we're, you know, we care a lot about the output. And as long as the output of the individual and team is okay, then, you know, we kind of trust that, you know, they're getting their work done when they need to get their work done. And if they can get their work done in an hour, power to it, right? Like power to them, like take that time and spend it with family. If it takes you a little bit extra to get your work done, okay, let's like try to plan better next time. And that's usually how we think about it. High trust environment for sure.
That's the big transition, I think, with remote, isn't it? There's an expectation in an office environment that if you get something done in an hour, then do the next thing. Whereas that output approach of more remote companies is quite different. Can we come on next to, I think, the question that everybody's actually joined in to hear, because as event professionals, we're all slightly control freaks. And so that issue of managing your team when you can't see them, and we've touched on trust, but how do you manage your teams without smothering them? How do you kind of keep that connection when you can't see what they're doing, where you've lost that immediacy? What's the secret sauce, Kelly?
I'm not sure you should be asking us, should be asking our teams. But I think for me, it was just quickly when you mentioned about psychological safety, I think that's been like, I mean, I hope my team wouldn't say that I've been smothering them, but what we did for quite a decent period of time have daily, like midday, I think we did them daily Zoom meetings, and we'd schedule them for an hour, and it was that classic thing of if you schedule a meeting for a period of time, it always lasts that long. But sometimes we were on there for an hour and a half. But I think that as a result of doing that, I think it was kind of what we all needed a little bit at the time, because we didn't only talk about work things. We did meet with purpose, and we did have goals that we wanted to reach, and we set ourselves you know, deadlines and things, but we did also spend quite a lot of time, and I'm sure there were probably a couple of meetings in there where we pretty much only talked about ourselves and how we were doing. And you know, I tried to be as open as possible about, I'm not really very good at hiding my feelings, and so I was just open and honest with them and just said, you know, I'm not having a great day today, this has happened or whatever. And I think because of that, we like I said earlier, we have become closer, but also I think we've got more of a feeling of that we're in this together now. So I think that doesn't really answer the question, does it? But what I was saying about the daily meetings, then what's been a challenge is that now that some of us are back in the office some of the time, but in a team of, I mean, currently there's 5 of us in the team. Normally there's 7, but a couple have been seconded off to do something else. So there's 5 of us, and 2 are not back in the office at all yet. So we have a real mixture of, you know, people all over the place. So we still do meet 3 times a week, which is way more than we ever did before, because we just used to have one check-in as a team at the end of the week. But I think the benefit of continuing to do that not only is to support the people who are at home permanently still, but also it's kind of so I've lost my chain of thought there slightly. Apologies. I think it's that we I was completely gone, Heidi. Sorry. I'll get it back.
Kelly, don't worry.
Don't worry. Embarrassing. Sorry.
Think on it. We'll come back to you. RD, can we ask the same question of you, please?
Yeah, I think we might have similar things here. I mean, it's that check-in, the ability to check in with others, make sure everybody's okay, that we're all in this together, and then finding some reason for engagement where it's possible. But I also think, taking care of your employees and thinking about, their situation. I mean, it's one kind of the cool thing is when you start, then when COVID started and you started to see into people's living rooms and everything like that, and we discovered virtual backgrounds. And, so we got to know people in a different personal way, like, oh, what's that photograph up there? Or like, why do you have a machete hanging on the wall? That's kind of weird. So there was that. We got to see people in a different way that we wouldn't have in the office. But then some companies are really known for super taking care of their employees. And, we all know that the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and, companies want to help employees, reach to the point that they feel part of the company, that they really feel part of the company. It's an organization we work with here in New Hampshire that has sit-stand workstations, and Google called them and said, hey, can you create a portal for our Googlers to so that they can order that because of the health benefit of it, and help. And so they gave all the employees a stipend to be able to get a proper desk set up. I mean, even as basic as that, because it turned out a lot of people are on ironing boards. They had the craziest setups, and having people set up right is really, really important. So not only that, sort of the illegal extension of the home office is technically, a liability for the company. So they need to make sure their employees are set up right. But it's just another sign that they're taking care of their family, and it's that sense of family that in times like this that keep that bond together. So checking in, thinking about the situation of the employees, and trying to do things to help.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you. Brennan, you being completely remote, I imagine you've never had this problem.
No, I think I think we all have on-site, remote. When it comes to managing your team, I think without smothering them, I mean, like the word micromanagement pops up in everyone's brain, and certainly I haven't met a micromanager who thinks they are one, but there certainly are a lot of them. And like the chat is saying, like others have said so far, I think it comes down to creating a culture of accountability and culture of trust, but. The way you do that in a remote environment has to be, 10 to 100 times more deliberate to have the same effect and impact. And it's not that it's necessarily rocket science or hard. It's actually that it's just so much easier to do it in person because you have body language, you have the ability to look at people and see that they're working without talking to them. You have all of these nonverbal cues that go missing, right? And we just haven't been trained, in general, on how to be excellent managers. And so we kind of have to stumble into these things ourselves. But basically, to give a couple tips here, it boils down to like three core categories. And then within, I think the important one that we're talking about, relating to smother, there's a couple keys in there as well. But one is your interaction with your team, right? And typically in remote, that's going to be on a Zoom call or a Google Meet or whatever. You're going to be doing, your interactions that will be thought of as, hey, this is my time to be a manager, will be on a meeting. And in fact, I think the stats are out that meetings are up. 70% of employees now have more meetings, and we're spending 10% more time in meetings already. And that's been going up 10% a year consistently since 2000. So it's been a pretty big shift for sure for a lot of folks, especially those who haven't been used to this prior. But those interactions I think are really key, and I'll come back because there's a couple of tips there. The second one is outcome-based objectives. instead of work, right? Instead of tasks. And this is just a good management tool you should have in office as well, because you're too busy to know what everyone is working on. If you can get them instead to think about, how do I get the results that my boss wants? I can, figure out the best way to do that based on my skills and expertise. And third is morale, team morale, right? And we all know that, sales teams with high, morale sell more, and engineers with high morale build more and are happier and productive. And a lot of times within your management utility belt, if morale's down, you might adjust goals. You might adjust interactions. You might, do things a little bit differently. And again, in real life, you can just sense some of that, right? Like you walk onto the sales floor and like everyone's mopey. Whereas now you walk into the sales floor and you have no idea, because there is no sales floor anymore. We're all at home. And so I think it comes down to the interactions you have over your virtual meetings become 10 to 100 times more important. And so specifically within that, sorry, this is like my rant. I'll get off my soapbox here in a second. I think there's a couple key things that you need to do a very, very good job as a team leader, as a manager. And the first, Heidi, you mentioned it, psychological safety. You have to be a very safe, you must on your team and within relationships with your report have a high safety. And the best way, like that's like a PhD word, but the best way to think about that is like everyone in kindergarten has high psychological safety. They're pretty okay to go to the kindergarten, classroom and talk about like how they were biting rocks. And that could be weird, but like no one thinks it's weird. And they all just say like, oh, cool, thanks for sharing. Whereas high school, you have low psychological safety, right? Like no one talks unless it's like to agree. And everyone is wearing the same clothes and listening to the same music and all that stuff. And what you want is you want it to be okay to disagree with people who you don't spend a lot of time with, right? Almost like kindergartners. And that's a hard culture to foster. And something I think you have to deliberately do. And the best way to do that is to be vulnerable first. Kelly, as you were saying, like share your emotions first. Hey, we're going through a pandemic. We're all scared here. I'm scared, right? We don't know what's going on. Let's get through it together, and model some of the behaviors, and then reward and encourage that when your team does the same thing. The second, low effort to communicate to. If your team likes video calls, do video calls. If your team likes Slack, do Slack. If your team likes email, do email. If your team likes texting, whatever it is, you don't want them to go, oh, it's too much work to tell my boss this one thing. I don't want to schedule a call, right? You really have to have this low effort way to talk about those important things, like I'm feeling burnt out, or I'm feeling scared, or I'm lonely. Otherwise, you're not going to know those things. And then the third and most important thing on the interactions that you have together, if you fostered those two, which is hard enough, is extremely high benefit. If people are doing these things, it should be worth it to do it, right? If they're giving you feedback on how you can be a better boss, you have to very quickly show them that you've listened and that you're going to do something about that, right? And if you have all three of those things right, then I think, and then you pair that with outcome-based objectives and knowing the morale of your team, I think you're going to be in a situation where you're actually doing way less meetings and you're getting way more done. And in fact, you're probably like going to bed earlier and having, nice stress-free days. But to get there is a lot of work. And certainly, none of us have been trained to do that. And in fact, the only experience we have is probably what our bosses did to us, which was in office. So it becomes, 10 to 100 times harder. Okay, I'll mute myself now.
Those are really useful insights. Thank you, Brendan, for sharing. I think if we just do one last question, and then there's some Q&A appearing in the box, so we'll go to that. I wondered, and it might be that the answer to this is none. Certainly, all of the organisations I've spoken to in the events world so far aren't doing anything differently. But I wondered if Kelly and RD, whether you're using any different tools and technologies, whether working remote has, obviously you're using Zoom, but actually are you using any other tools to kind of support and facilitate remote work at the moment?
Can I finish off that point that I forgot earlier? Sorry, everyone's probably forgotten what I was saying now. It's the weekend here, by the way. It's like nearly 8 o'clock on your Friday night. So it's I'm going to use that as my excuse. For forgetting what I was going to say. If I'm in danger of doing it again, so I'll stop. Yeah, so what I was going to say about the benefits still of meeting 3 times a week, we've dropped down from 5 to 3, but the brilliant thing is that it's made it so much easier for me to make sure I'm sharing everything that I learn as a kind of middle manager with the team. And I know how I feel when I feel I'm not being communicated with the important things from above. You know, I know how I want to feel. You know, I'm passionate about my job, and I'm very loyal to whatever company I work for, and I want to feel a sense of something in return. I want them to share with me what's going on. I want to feel a sense of belonging, and I've always been quite conscious that maybe it was quite an effort to do that in the past, to remember to do that for my team. But now it's just easier because we're talking to each other so much more, and so it's just become much more natural. So if anything, for me, that's been quite good, because I think that's become a bit of a habit for me now, which I hope will stick with me, and I'll continue to do. On to your next question, which is about software. We use Microsoft Teams now. We started using Microsoft Teams when, early on in lockdown, and I mean, Microsoft Teams has been developing massively, hasn't it, during the last 6 months? But it has definitely been good for us. I think, you have various different sort of connectivity issues sometimes with trying to connect to a remote network and get to save documents. And we were doing much more collaborative type work anyway, because we were doing project work together. So it's been really, really great for us, particularly on the fact that, you can all be working on the same document. It's not new. Google Docs was doing it ages ago, but it's just because it's all in one place. It's great. So you've got your video meetings and your chat and your phone calls and everything all in one place. So that has been really good for us, definitely.
Yeah,
so I think there's this incredible evolution going on. So the tools that did exist, are being pushed to the limits and being used in ways that they probably were never thought of. And there's this sort of Microsoft is a good example with Teams. There's been a real pressure on those tools to adjust. But I think there's this whole, I can see them, this slate of tools coming out that are adjusting to the new normal. So I mean, and then one thing we haven't talked about is remote work has hit a tipping point. It was hitting a tipping point in America already, the ability to do it. It's clearly hit it now. And, the one thing I wouldn't want to own is commercial real estate, office space. We will have hybrid situations, but if you want the best talent in the world, you're going to have to offer the flexible work arrangements that talent wants. And so, we are not going back. The tools are going to adapt to that. We're seeing it. And they're getting funded, all across the world. The other thing is, so we as a company, 365 Media, we help nonprofits, associations, corporations do virtual events, and think about a nonprofit, how they used to fundraise. So a lot of the tools that existed adapted quickly so that they could do online fundraising, but there's this whole slew of really cool technologies coming out. So innovation is right at hand, and I'm excited to see what's coming because of this shift.
Okay, thank you. Brennan, can you talk to us a little bit about your tech stack? And whilst you're at it, can you answer Jen Grayson's question, who asks, how do you keep communication channels open? Something that's very easily resolved in the office suddenly becomes a larger issue when communication breaks down between teams.
Yeah, well, you teed me up there. I mean, we primarily to answer that question, use a couple tools. Slack is our big one just for chat. Google Meet we use because we use Google Calendar and that kind of suite of tech. Google Docs we use a lot for internal, and then Zoom usually for our external meetings. But the big piece of technology, honestly, that we use to kind of run our business is actually our own product, Soapbox. And so one-on-ones with every direct report is in Soapbox. And it's really helpful to, like we said, if you have something to talk about, it's kind of your safe place to put those things. You can, bring stuff up with your manager can bring stuff up with you. We have AI running in the background to highlight to the managers and employees what you're missing, what your blind spots are. If you haven't talked about motivation, or you haven't talked about growth, or you haven't shared, corporate news up and down the org chart, it'll let you know, which is nice, because how else are we going to know those things about ourselves? pushes you to hold each other accountable in a really, light way without feeling like that smothering boss, and encourages you to have those outcome based objectives. So we use that for our one-on-ones. We use that for our team meetings as well. It's just kind of known as the place to, if it's in Soapbox, it'll get talked about. If it's in Soapbox, it'll get done. Obviously that's true with our customers as well. So that's, in a way, I guess, how we keep communication channels open. And I guess, in a way, what the tech that we're using to help us, be and stay remote as time goes on. So yeah, I mean, encourage you guys to check it out, but also, feel free to ping me and I can give you tips on how we do that, specifically apply some of those things into our app. Great, thank you.
And to some extent, possibly that's the same answer for the other questions here. Do you have any tips for supporting new starters remotely? I mean, I think that's a particularly difficult thing, particularly if they're straight out of college and maybe not used to that office environment. Apart from Soapbox, which is obviously a key principle of that, but are there any other ways that you can help to support new starters remotely?
I think, yeah, we're going through this ourselves. I think the first thing is you're going to really want to have both a really deliberate hiring process, right? If you're going to hire remote, but a really deliberate onboarding process. And part of that, I think, includes the standard stuff, like let's get this person a computer and let's get this person's office set up and let's get this person company swag so they feel excited about, being a part of a team. But also into the little things that weren't possible before, right? So can you, record video messages for their first day from everyone so they start to meet people's faces and learn people's names in a new way? Can you have them all set up on tech before they start so it's not as threatening? Can you have them, we do on our demo day, we have them do, it's called a first demo day, but we have a little presentation they do that's basically a get to know me to the team. And it's, 10 slides all about them and photos of them and, their place of work and all that stuff. And it's honestly everyone's favorite day of the year. We just make them feel super, super welcome. And then little things as well, like get someone in the same time zone, get someone in the same, but a totally different role in your organization to be like your onboarding buddy, who is not in any way related to their line of work or their boss, right? So that they can have like a, just like a trusted person to go to that's like, hey, stupid question, but like, you're my person to go to for these stupid questions. I don't want to look stupid in front of my boss type questions. How do I, where do I find the biggest thing, I think, the difference between being remote and in office is written documentation. And so if you can write all of these things up and have it available, with a search or a link, you're going to find yourself in a much better situation than in person. It's way easier to, let me give you the tour and let me show you and point out these things.
Great tips. Thank you, Brennan. And I think on that, actually, I'd also point people to remotework360.com. We've got lots of articles and educational content. We're starting to introduce a webinar series helping people to manage remotely. And I think Brennan touched on that, the deliberateness of being remote and the documentation required and the change in communication structure. And certainly all of the companies I've been speaking to haven't done any of that. They, all of their staff are suddenly remote and they're coping, they're firefighting, they're managing, but it's tough going. And I think actually learning from some of the companies that are already remote, how they've been more deliberate, how they've documented their processes, particularly how they've used tools and technology to reduce the reliance on Zoom meetings. Remote companies tend to switch to a much more asynchronous form of communication, which means that you don't have to have a team of 8. If you imagine having a team of 8 people in a Zoom meeting, that's 8 man-hours that you've just used up on a meeting. And the chances are that 2 or 3 of them only needed to contribute for a few minutes. So if you use something like Slack, where all of that stuff is getting channeled in and stored and can be viewed at people's own kind of convenience, then it's just a much more productive and effective way of operating. There's one final question that I was just going to draw on, which was, do companies ever agree to pay extra to staff for increased heating and electricity. My take on that is it's kind of no different to when you work somewhere you have commuting costs. When you work from home you have electricity costs. So I personally would think that that's kind of a fair exchange. But any other thoughts from the panelists?
I just read an article on this today, and it went to the extreme. Like, why wouldn't you do it? Like, if really, I mean, if you really embrace your employees, you trust your employees, you set good goals for your employees, why wouldn't you take that little extra step and give them sort of a home office package? And this article went on to say they even covered toilet paper, which I thought was great because you're using more of that, I guess, when you're working at home. But just a funny example, but why not take the opportunity to really take care and embrace your employees? There's one other just really cool point I want to get across here, because I think there's a lot of events industry professionals on this call. This is a real opportunity for the events industry. Like I said, I really think we're at a tipping point. I think we'll have hybrid opportunities, but we are forever now going to have a growing remote workforce because we've learned how to do it and we're figuring out that it works pretty well. Here's a real opportunity for the events industry, because guess where we can all get together? Events, right? It even makes it more important that we go to certain events and get together, and our teams themselves can get together at events, because if we're using the power of remote to hire anywhere in the world to get the best talent, that event can be the place where we meet together. So I think this is a real thing for the events industry to look at.
That's a good point. Great, thank you. Well, I'd like to thank Kelly, Brennan and RD for joining us today, and for all the participants, and thank you for watching.